Okay, here we go with chapter 6. And so here, of course, are the goals that your learning objectives for this chapter. So kind of stop and take a look at this. And here we go, developmental tasks. All right, an elaboration of movement. The dynamic systems theory, which is spelled out in your book, is very, very good. In other words, physical characteristics of the limbs, joints, and muscles involved in movement play a critical role. How the child develops. They're changing in their body muscle mass. The central nervous system, actually, we're getting more and more myelin in the body, so the child can move faster and more efficiently. Um, and then what are the behavioral goals? In other words, what do we want to do? And then does the child have opportunities to practice? So again, parents and brothers and sisters and family play a big role. And let's go out in the backyard and play. So look, I just put this in because I think this is very important. It's in your book. I don't think kids get enough activity and enough physical activity nowadays. And here's what I believe they should, this would be minimum. Um, and so it should be 30 minutes of structured, but also um, unstructured time becomes more and more important in play. I've mentioned before that adult structured play is becoming too prevalent. I know that my own grandsons are very young and they're already in organized soccer leagues, and there's organized swimming and organized this and that. And parents are in control, or adults are in control of everything, rather than here's a ball, go kick it and figure out what game you're going to play and how you're going to play it and what the rules are going to be and how you're going to deal with if a little bit of controversy occurs. And so are they learning those social skills? Um, and so I just feel like these are important. Um, Now, language, and we're going to talk about, again, this is a Piaget concept of developmental task as far as language is concerned. He called it the pre-operational, and operational is mental types of abilities to solve problems. Um, so the child now has achieved object permanence. They do know that things exist. And even though I can't see them, the child is now initiate their own activities and exploring on their own. They can use mental representations and symbols. They're starting to learn language that words stand for something, and it's not always logical. The child will gain an ability to um, take and put back together what they just experienced in thought and in words. Um, and so they are now starting to use their words. They're starting to draw more. They're starting to use images. Look at this whole stage here as we're kind of moving into the stage where they can start to use concepts that are going to be used over and over and over again. Um, and so they're starting to, in Piaget's mind, actually starting to think. Um, so they can, whoops, sorry, that's a repeat. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. They are what um, Piaget called egocentric. And that doesn't mean what we think of when we think of an egocentric adult. It's just that I can't realize that you might see something different than I'm seeing it. They're animistic. In other words, inanimate objects can have lifelike qualities. You have to be careful with this because it can be cultural, and then of course magical beliefs could come into play. But here's the study, here's the egocentric study. The child is sitting at these mountains and it's looking at the mountain, and there will be different figures on one side of the mountain. It might be a goat, a tree, a rock. And then they will ask the child, okay, what is this doll seeing from the other side? And the child will say, whatever they're seeing is what they believe the doll is seeing. So um, the new experiment with this has to do with broccoli and crackers. And you're going to read about a researcher in the preschool article that did this. And so basically what it is children prefer crackers over broccoli. So what they would do is the researcher would look at the broccoli and go, ooh, ooh, ah, this looks awful, and then the crackers, and then push them over the child and say, well, what do I really want? Give me what I want. And of course they give you the crackers. Now what about if I go to the broccoli and ooh to the crackers? And I want you to know they found that kids preferred crackers over broccoli. So now I push it over there, and now what's happening is we're different. We're thinking about something different. We're going to talk about theory of mind. And so how do I handle that? I can't be egocentric anymore. I have to say, well, if you like the broccoli, I'll give you the broccoli, even though the child would do it reluctantly. So this egocentricity goes away sooner than Piaget felt. And also when they did the study where they didn't use mountains, but they used some other structure, because some children don't grow up with mountains. And so they don't understand what being on the other side of the mountain would be like. So preposition, intuitive thoughts, substage, all right. Can't answer the question, what if? Always ask the question, why? Why is this happening? So you'll hear them say, why? Begin to grasp functionality, that actions and outcomes are related in fixed ways, and begin to grasp their identity. They can't conserve, okay, and I'm going to show you this in a second, because of what is called centration. In other words, they center on one feature of what they're looking at, and they can't reverse something. So in other words, if I take some clay that's in a ball and roll it into a stick, they don't understand that that stick can be rolled back into a ball. So that would be that. So here is conservation. And here's the top one is the classic experiment where 2 equal glasses of liquid, one's poured into a taller, narrow glass, one into a shorter. Which one contains more? The taller one. They're centrating on the look that one's taller, it's bigger. And they do the ones with the coins and so forth. So they don't understand that something maintains its properties even though it looks different. So even with Piaget, when it comes to how much trouble you're in, well, how big of a mess did you make? Okay, the bigger the mess, the more trouble you're in. Criticisms of Piaget is they're not as egocentric as they were thought to be, and the 3-mountain task is the problem. Animism is overestimated, and also it's cultural, and magic. They see magic as out of the ordinary. Okay. Now, and then logic develops more gradually than Piaget thought, and maybe the tasks were just too complex and the children didn't understand completely what they were doing. Okay, more on language. First of all, there's got to be communicative competence. In other words, I want to be able to communicate. There's the child desires to communicate. What's the language environment? In other words, is language being encouraged? I want you to watch the little talk on language and reading, because I'm going to kind of debunk this theory of fast mapping, that there is a time when children can hear a word one time and remember that word and remember what it means, that they have this huge language explosion. Maybe it happens more gradually through more exposures. So I want you to watch that, but you have to take a quiz. Telegraphic speech is they go from 1-word sentences to 2-word sentences. They over-regularize, which is kind of an interesting concept, because it seems like they start to understand grammar, but they don't, or the need for grammar, but they don't quite understand how grammar works. So they would say, I seed it, not because they heard someone say that or it was reinforced that way, but because ed means past tense. So there are the mooses. Okay, and so forth. There seems to be something inside the child's brain that wants to understand grammar. There's got to be interaction between people. In several of the little lectures that you will watch, he'll talk about the importance of how much time parents or primary caregivers spend interacting with the child. Question asking is very important. Does the child get an answer to their question? Does one question lead to another question? What kind of questions do you ask the child? Do you ask for a single answer, or do you ask them to kind of expand on their answer? And we've already talked about scaffolding and the zone of proximal development. In other words, we build language. Bilingualism is very, very good. It has so many positive outcomes. The earlier children learn a second language, the better. It really helps them in later language acquisition. They found that they don't just switch from one language to another, that actually in code mixing, but they actually have both languages running parallel to each other. It just helps, and bilingualism is something that I believe that should be started in preschool, if not before. Here's some milestones in language, and this is in your book, so just kind of take a look at these, and it's very good. And let's take a look at play. Pretense requires that children understand the difference between pretend and reality. So theory of mind becomes very important, the understanding of someone else's mental state. It kind of goes along with what we talked about with Piaget and the egocentrism and the kind of the broccoli cracker experiment. And so here's the classic theory of mind experiment that they give children. This is Sally. Sally has a basket. Anne has a box. Sally has a marble. She puts the marble in her basket. Sally goes away for a walk. Anne takes the marble out of the basket and puts it in her box. Now when Sally comes back, she wants to play with the marble. Where will she look for the marble? In where she left it, or where Anne has put it? Well, she's going to look in the basket because that's where she left it. She has no reason to believe that it would be anywhere else. So what we're trying to do is the child is trying to understand, what would Sally be thinking in this situation? Now children, this happens by about 4 years old. Children that acquire it earlier usually have older siblings because they're saying, don't go in my room, don't play with my toy, don't do this. So they start to understand that there are certain things that maybe they should know. They found that children that are bilingual understand this earlier because they understand there's more than one way to think about something. And then culturally, even if they don't do it linguistically, they can start to look at a young child and say, oh, the child is hungry, the child is sad. So even if language it can be a problem, they can still understand that somebody else is thinking something different than themselves. Play changes over time. I've talked about play, how important it is. It focuses from just playing with my own toy to maybe playing parallel play, is playing next to somebody, but we're each doing our own thing, to now playing with each other. And then pretty soon we develop into play that is organized and planned, and we have rules, and so we play a game of basketball or football or whatever. Children use fantasy play to experiment with environments and expand their thinking. Piaget, they kind of assimilative value of play. They take it in. Vygotsky thought that play was very important because he felt that it was really representational of their real life, everyday life, that they're processing information in the same way they would when they weren't playing. So he believes that play is very important. And then, of course, Erickson also thought it was very important. Self-control, effort for control, delay gratification. Please watch the mini lecture and the film on the marshmallow experiment. It really kind of explains it all. So children should start to develop self-control over time. They do as their brain develops. Effort for control is very, very important. In other words, the parent says, whisper, don't yell. Don't run through the kitchen, but you can run in the living room. So they start to control themselves through effort. Um, and then, of course, self-regulation is a result of the mother-infant or primary care infant relationship. It increases. It starts with, first of all, it's very egocentric. It's only about them, and then it kind of goes to a level of where I see you're crying, and so I give you my favorite toy. Okay, to where then I start to understand that you need your own mother, you need your own toy, you need something, and then we can even go all the way in adulthood to where we actually use it as sympathy. We can empathize with people that we don't even know, or we're not in the same situation. Discipline definitely plays into self-control. Is it going to be a power assertion? I'm going to spank you, I'm going to yell at you, I'm going to show you I'm in control here. Is it love withdrawal? I'm only going to love you if or because you behave in a certain way. Or am I going to sit down and talk to you about it? Here's what was wrong, here's what you did wrong, and here's the consequences for that behavior. Can't be too detailed. The younger the child, it can become more detailed as they get older. Timeout is used. Usually it should be equal to the age of the child. So really, if a child is 2 years old, they shouldn't have a timeout that's any longer than 2 to 4 minutes. It has to be used right away. It can be interpreted as love withdrawal, so the parent has to, or power assertion, so the parent has to say, here's why you're getting the timeout, and when it's over, we're restored, and so forth. Okay. The crisis is autonomy versus shame, and basically this gets into independence. Look at this is where they call it the terrible twos, and really it's just because the child can do more things for themselves. So they can get their food for themselves. They can go grab their toy for themselves. So they want to do that. They want to explore. They want to. Will is the adaptive ego quality. All right. I want to be able to do things for myself. In Western culture, it's more independently. In non-Western cultures, it's more interdependent. It's more about what's good for the family, what's good for their group. Look at this, requires a lot of effort by the child. They're exerting a lot of energy and a ton of patience by the parents. They're going to say, I can do it. You don't have to do it for me. And they use no, not just as a word that they're being disrespectful. It can be, do you want a cookie? No. Do you want to go outside and play? No. Do you want these shoes? No. It's just it's a sign of independence. I am telling you no at your request. Shame, of course. Now I've tried to be independent, but even the overprotective parents can cause this because the child learns they can't do anything for themselves, and if they do it, they seem to do it incorrectly. So the parent working model becomes rejecting, indifferent, or unpredictable. Some cultures use shame, okay, because this will, if you behave this way, it will reflect poorly on the family. And oftentimes, children experience shame because their parents or those around them ridicule or overly criticize them. Now look at, it's one thing to be guilty, but it's another thing to be shameful. We don't want to tell the child, you are a stupid, dumb child. Okay, that causes shame. That's very personal. Guilt is, well, I did something wrong and I should feel a little guilty. Okay, imitation, of course, it speaks for itself. They just watch their parents do something and then they imitate that, and then pretty soon they can do it for themselves. Mirror neurons are very important in this, and I hope you watch the talk by Ramachandran. It's very, very good. He talks about mirror cells being the Gandhi cells. And then the last thing is will, the capacity to control and do things for myself, which becomes very important later in life. And rather than I become compulsive, which then in its most extreme sense would be OCD or something like that. Okay.